yesterday, that is on 15th October, the president signed into law 8 bills that had been approved by Parliament. And there have been a number of Kenyans who are talking about how some of these bills are controversial and why were these bills signed before the announcement of the demise of the former Prime Minister, the late Raila Odinga. So we are going to look at 8 of these bills that were signed into law so that you can spot the controversial bit. And I would like to have your opinion on these matters. So the first one is the Privatization Bill 2025. It was signed into law. And the controversial bit that I discovered was that, one, Parliament is no longer going to have the right to discuss or approve a privatization of a state-owned corporation. So think about the Kenya Pipeline Company that has been privatized, or has not yet been privatized, but is going to be privatized in March 2026. Parliament discussed that, they approved it. But according to this new law, Parliament doesn't have to discuss that. Parliament doesn't have to approve that. Instead, only the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury has the right to approve a privatization. The Privatization Authority, that is the authority that is going to be handling this privatization process, has to be supervised by Treasury. Unlike before, in under the old Act, the 2005 Act, where this privatization, the commission that was given this mandate to overhaul and have an oversight at this, had to be supervised by Parliament. So in short, you can see that power, or rather more power, is going to go into the executive arm rather than the legislative arm. The other one is in terms of transparency check. Any approval that is done by the CS, in this case, let's assume it's CS Mbadi, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury, any transparency check that has to be done has to be there has to be a gazette notice and a publication online. So that's how accountability is going to be done. So as Kenyans, we have to look out on these gazette notices. We have to read them. We have to review them, unlike before where the transparency check was done through a parliamentary review. So at least we have power to look at some of these suggestions that involve privatization. Now, the argument there, the criticism there might be, we're giving too much power to the executive. If the CS approves any privatization, unlike before where the legislature had the power to discuss all this, isn't more power given to the executive arm and not the legislative arm? But the argument on the other side is that whenever there's a discussion that involves Parliament, there's usually a delay. Because now there has to be a committee that has to be assigned this, there has to be a lot of discussions around this. So it takes time. And if there is a goal, for example, with us privatizing the Kenya Pipeline Company, and Treasury was looking forward to having finances from this sale, from this privatization that they want to add to the budget, there's going to be a delay. Like what happened? The privatization of KPC was supposed to happen in September, or it was being aimed at September, but now it has been pushed to March 2026. What do you think of this bill? What do you think of this bill? The other bill that was made to law yesterday was the Virtual Asset Service Providers Bill. Now, this one is targeting the crypto market. This one is targeting assets, virtual assets. When you look at this bill, is that one, any company or any entity or any institution that wants to provide such services, crypto services here in Kenya, they must have a physical office that is registered here in Kenya. There must be 3 board directors that are natural persons. They have to be Kenyan citizens. For you to get the approval to provide this service here in Kenya, you have to go through the Capital Markets Authority, which is an institution that looks at investments. For example, stocks is in charge of financial assets. So they fall under this docket. You have to get a license from them. And we also have the Central Bank of Kenya. So these are the 2 institutions that are going to have an oversight over any virtual asset service provider, over any institution. I also saw something else, like part of these requirements for you to provide this service here in Kenya is that you must have a bank account here in Kenya. You must make it possible for anyone who owns crypto to liquidate their assets. So those are some of the requirements that are there. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. I'm going to leave a link to this bill so that you can have a look at it. The other one, which is deemed to be controversial by majority of Kenyans, is the Computer Misuse Cybercrimes Amendment Bill. Now, this one is targeting the online space. And the controversial bit that I found out was that any website or any platform that promotes illegal activities, and by illegal activities, we're talking about extreme religious practices like cults. So if you're producing any content around cults, if you're producing any content around terrorism, child abuse, cybercrime, it can be shut down. In fact, the investigators who have deemed your content to be illegal have the right to go to court and request for your content to shut down even before it goes viral, assuming that they have identified a piece of content that is deemed to be harmful can go viral. It can be shut down before it goes viral. This bill also touches on digital impersonation and also data harvesting. So there's going to be a lot of streamlining that is going to be done to ensure that your privacy is also protected. There's been concern around this, especially when it involves expressing your opinion. Like, is it meant to suppress our opinions, especially when we are communicating that online, on social platforms, on TikTok, on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube? So think about that, because that has been controversial. That is the bit that has been deemed to be controversial by most Kenyans. What do you think about this? The other one is the National Land Commission Amendment Bill 2023. Now, this one is interesting because it's looking at historical injustices, assuming that there is some dispute that is related to the colonial era, assuming that your grandfather owned some land somewhere and there were historical injustices, especially during the colonial times, or if there is any illegal title allocations, or if there is any case of unfair land grabbing, you have to go to the National Land Commission and they get to look at such a case. Now, the provision here with this bill is that you only have 5 years. There's a 5-year window for the National Land Commission to hear your plight. This is October 2025. You have until October 2030 to raise such an issue, especially if it involves what I have outlined: illegal land disputes, unfair land grabs. So if you're going to raise this concern after October 2030, it cannot be heard by the National Land Commission. But there's a provision in that Parliament has the right to increase this 5-year window. They can say, we are giving you a 2-year extension, a 3-year extension for you to submit your plea. The other bill that was signed into law is the Land Bill. This one is different from the National Land Commission Amendment Bill. This one is different. So according to the Land Bill, any sale of public land has to be published in the Kenyan Gazette. It has to be published in the Kenyan Gazette. Now, this wasn't there. This provision wasn't there, but at least now we are going to have transparency in terms of what public land or what piece of land is being sold that is public land. It has to be published in the Kenyan Gazette by the registrar. Now, the only unclear provision here is that there is a certain section that is mentioned, and they cite subsection 16 in clause 5. And when you read this subsection, this clause, it's actually suggesting that it might not apply to all sales. It might not apply to all, it might not be applied to every land that is being sold. So there's a lot of, not even a lot of, there is some, there's some ambiguity around that, because why not disclose all sales, right? The other bill that was also passed yesterday is the Air Passenger Service Charge. Not passed, but signed to law. The Air Passenger Service Charge Amendment Bill 2025. And this one is mainly targeting the aviation industry, where one, the Kenya Meteorological Service Authority is going to be added into the list of beneficiaries who are going to be receiving this charge. So they are going to be receiving this revenue that is usually collected from this service charge. That's an added bonus to the aviation sector, because when you think about the services that they provide around weather, them doing weather forecasts. They play a critical role in the aviation industry. We can't argue on that. The other one is in terms of the actual charge. This charge, the air passenger service charge, used to be $40 for an international flight. It's now going to be $50. So you can see that there's that increment of $10. And for domestic flights, assuming that you're just flying within the country, this charge has been increased from 500 shillings to 600 shillings. The seventh bill that was signed by the president yesterday is the National Police Service Commission Amendment Bill 2024. Now, this one revolves around mental health, especially for police officers. In that, there's going to be a mandatory mental health support for police officers. In fact, there should be establishments that are going to be set at the county level and at the national level that are going to help police officers with their mental health, counseling, psychological related services. So this is a bonus for police officers. And also there's going to be promotion of officer welfare. They're going to be offered better working conditions. Their housing is also going to improve, and they're also going to be supported when it comes to career development. So this one is not controversial per se. Now, the final bill that was signed to law is the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act. According to this act, one, compensation of victims has been widened, in that if you are a victim, if you have incurred an injury from marine life, to be specific, whales, sharks, starfish, dolphins, you are eligible for compensation. You have to be compensated. This one wasn't included in the previous, in the act that existed before. The other one is in terms of the actual compensation, the duration, in that these compensations for these injuries have to be done within 12 months after approval. This one is meant to speed up the process of you being compensated, which is a good thing as well. The other one is in terms of revenue sharing between the county government and the national government. So these revenues that are being collected from the national parks, from reserves, they are also going to be used to benefit the local communities that live around wildlife. These are my 2 cents. 6 out of these 8 bills were passed by Parliament in September. So that is before October. 2 of these bills, to be specific, the Virtual Assets Bill, the one that is targeting cryptocurrency and virtual assets, and the National Police Service Commission Amendment Bill were the ones that were passed by Parliament this October. So the point is this: we as Kenyans had time to look into these bills that were passed by Parliament before they were signed, because they were passed in September. If there is any point of contention, as responsible citizens, we should have raised this, because after a bill has been approved by Parliament, the automatic procedure is for it to be signed by the president. So we were to look into that before it was signed. Now, for the other 2 bills, the ones that I've mentioned, the Virtual Assets and National Police Service bills were passed about 1 week ago, 1 to 1.5 weeks ago. So probably if there was to be any suspicion regarding members of Parliament passing this bill, these were the bills that were to be targeted. But again, this doesn't take away the fact that some of these bills are controversial. So at the point of them being passed, at that specific point, we should have raised concerns, because again, we were expecting for these bills to be signed. Those are my 2 cents. Anyway, what do you think of these bills? Do you see any suspicion around these bills being made into law yesterday, considering the major event that happened? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments.